Welcome back to r/neighbors from hell, where people share stories about their crazy neighbors. If you are new around here, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel to join our amazing community. And if you haven't already, please also don't forget to check out my Patreon at patreon.com/ripeyoutube for exclusive Reddit content. Without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. This one is titled, Neighbor Parks His Car and Blocks My Exit, Don't Mess with the Woman Scorned. This happened about 5 years ago when I moved into a wheelchair-friendly unit. I am a 29-year-old disabled female in a wheelchair, and the unit complex I live in has 20 units, upstairs and down, but only half of the tenants have assigned parking. I have a car space, but this neighbor didn't. It took a while for tenants to get used to this. It was a brand new complex and the tenants all moved in at the same time, but one of them, let's call him Dick, either didn't get it or didn't care. He would constantly park in my car space, and every time I confronted him about it, he claimed not to know, but he would park there anyway. I informed the landlords about this and they sent out constant letters until he finally got the message. But did he park on the street? Nope. He started to park his car along the driveway, sometimes blocking my exit. To get out of my door, I go down a ramp and then turn onto the driveway, but he would park his car and block my exit. There was no back exit, so this was my only way to exit my place. I told the landlords about this and the council parking officer in hopes they could make him stop doing this. I confronted Dick a few times and told him not to do this and warned him that his car might get damaged if I tried to get my wheelchair around it. But did he listen? Nope. One glorious day when I needed to leave, I saw his car parked halfway across my exit. There was just enough room for me to get around, but I knew I would scrape the side of his car with the side of my power wheelchair if I tried to get around it. I had two options: stay home and miss my appointments, or try and get around his car. I went with option B. Before you have a go at me for damaging his car, it was an old beat up tin can that already had some scratches on it. What's one more? When I got home, his car was still parked there. So I called a tow truck company and told them there was a car parked illegally, blocking access to my home. I don't like using my disability to my advantage, but I'd had enough. The call went something like this. Hello? Yes, I'm sorry to bother you, but I am in a wheelchair and I cannot get into my house because there's a car parked there. It's my neighbor and he won't stop parking there. I need to get inside. Oh my god, what? What's the address? We will be right there. 10 minutes later, the tow truck arrived. He saw the car and me stuck out in the driveway with tears, dramatized for effect, in my eyes. Not long before the driver was about to tow the car away, Dick came out screaming, "Wait, what are you doing? That's my car!" The rest was Dick yelling inaudible sentences asking why his car was being towed and threatening to sue the tow truck company. Based on the crapfest of a tin can he calls a car, he did not have a leg to stand on. He moved away about 2 years ago, but in the remaining time he lived there, he parked his car on the street. And guys, I would definitely argue that this douchebag got what he deserved. He might have even deserved a little bit more. You know, I gotta say, in terms of accessibility, Thailand is definitely not the greatest country. If I would need a wheelchair, I definitely could not imagine living here, because even as simple things like boardwalks are definitely not made for wheelchairs. And don't get me started about crossing the street, because I would definitely not even try that in a wheelchair. And in addition, I'm curious, does your country pay attention to accessibility? For example, having sidewalks that can be accessed by wheelchairs? Let us know in the comments. And the next one is titled, Neighbors Fighting All Night and Sleep All Day, I Wake Them Up at 8 AM every morning. This is a follow-up to a story I posted a week ago about my drunken upstairs neighbor. Hope you enjoy. I live in a unit complex and for the past week the neighbors in the unit above me have been fighting non-stop, slamming doors and playing loud music until all hours of the morning, alcoholic mother 60 years old, 30-year-old daughter and the occasional boyfriend of one of them. The quarantine for the virus is making most of us go a little crazy, but they are going a little too stir crazy being locked up in the same unit together, so I have some sympathy for them, but not enough to sacrifice my own sleep for. I reported them to the people in charge of the units, but it did not stop, so here is where my petty revenge starts. I am an early riser. I am usually awake by 7 AM and get up around 8 AM. My upstairs neighbors sleep until 12 PM. I'm sure you can see where this story is going. I have an iPod dock in my living room that I can control using my phone, so for the last few days I've had it set to turn on and play music from 7 AM until 8 AM every morning. The volume it is set at makes my floors rattle and they can definitely hear it. Needless to say, I did not hear a peep from them last night, so I guess they got the message. I can handle them fighting, just not while I am trying to sleep. Edit, with the way the units are laid out, my upstairs neighbors are the only ones that can hear the music. I've put my music on and gone outside, and you cannot hear it. I have checked with my other neighbors and they said they have not heard anything, so I know it is not affecting anyone else. And guys, if you have watched until here, please don't forget to post some star emojis in the comments and also like the video if you want to support me. Thank you very much in advance. The next one is entitled Neighbor took my mother to court to get primary custody of my mother's dog. When my mother and her dog moved next door to EN, entitled Neighbor, they fell in love with my mother's dog Max. For about 2 years EN would come to get Max for visits. EN would watch Max if my mother went out of town or just so they could play with him. EN moved across town and would still call to ask for Max visits. My mother started letting the dog go less and less, but would say yes now and again because for EN's pleading. Just before one of the arranged visits, Max got into a fight with another dog. Max seemed to be okay. When EN came, my mother said she was worried about letting him go because of the dog fight. EN promises that she would look after Max and make sure he was okay. The next day, EN called my mother and told her that she took Max to the vet because he had a wound on his neck. EN also told my mother that she was keeping Max because my mother neglected the dog. My mother was devastated. So my mom called the police. They could not help because she had agreed to allow the dogs to go with EN. My mother had to file a civil complaint and it took 2 months to go to court. EN told the judge that she and my mother had always shared custody of the dog and that EN was the most fit dog parent, so EN should have the dog. The judge explained that Max was my mother's possession and that EN was to return him immediately. He also said EN was responsible for the vet bill and no, my mother did not have to give EN visitation. To be honest guys, I did not even know that custody fights about a dog in court are a thing. Have you ever seen something like this before? Either way, I'm glad the dog was returned to the mother. And guys, please put on your seatbelts because the next one is an absolutely amazing XXL revenge neighbor story. It is titled The Neighborhood Remembers, The Neighborhood Punishes. This is a story I've been sitting on for a few years now, and having discovered Pro Revenge a couple months ago, I decided it is finally time to let the world know what happened to a sociopath who dared to cross the neighborhood. I was a minority in this neighborhood and I caught a lot of heat for it. People did not really like white people there, but enough of our neighbors were accepting of us that aside from a few disagreements between families and the beatings that came with them, I did not feel like I was in danger when leaving my home. It was a rough neighborhood, but it was my home and it protected its own. The community center was like a temple and, let's call her AM, was the priestess. In our neighborhood, she was respected like a living deity and her calm and understanding reflected her status. I never once saw her behave without a strong moral code. And the final piece to set this stage, our former landlord, short Asian lady in all the stereotypical ways, kind and sweet. Our house was above my parents' pay grade and she knew it. She went out of her way to find house repair and maintenance jobs for tenants that were having money problems. She would pay them by taking chunks out of their rent, oftentimes a bit larger than how much the work they did was worth. Looking back, that was probably illegal, but that is irrelevant because she died. The circumstances surrounding her death were suspect, but none of the suspects play a part in this story, so there is no need to go into detail on it. Her sons, who wanted nothing to do with real estate, took over the business. They could not make heads or tails of how she managed to float books with so much red in them and began dumping properties. Ours was on that list. I harbor no ill will towards them and still wish them the best, but the guy who bought the house entered a sociopath and today's victim. This guy wasted no time in making our lives hell. His first action was to raise the rent. Apparently when the account changed hands, he was allowed to update the rent to modern pricing. We had been there for several years and were paying below market even from the onset, so this was a huge blow by itself. The second blow came when he said that the rent had to be ready in full on the first of every month, no partial payments, no work to reduce it, no extensions. Full rent on the first of the month or an eviction notice on the second. This was hemorrhaging our savings, but we were surviving for the moment. Meanwhile, AM had lobbied hard for the city to co-fund a revival project to renovate the entire aging suburb, and she succeeded. One street at a time, had conga lines of work trucks almost every day, and people were getting old leaky pipes replaced, sinkholes in yards patched, fences repaired, paint renewed. It was an amazing thing and an enticing thing for the sociopath. Being at the corner of the neighborhood, our house was on the last street on the list and sociopath wanted us out so he could relist the house after renovation. He never said this directly, but multiple conversations made his intent clear even for 10-year-old me. Random inspections, overhyping of minor problems with the house, even so far as trying to bring us up on completely false animal abuse charges because our cat was attacked by what we believe was a raccoon and he tried to claim we did it. Yeah, because a vet cannot figure out the difference between knife wounds and a mauling. We read the writing on the wall and began preparations to move. We decided to move in with my oldest brother in a place I will call Banjoland. Most of us had moved except my other brother, who stayed behind because he still had a lot of social ties in Palmville, and his new job meant if he cut corners, he could keep paying sociopaths inflated bills. Well, despite his best efforts, he came up $20 short one month and sociopath jumped on it. He had 30 days. We made the 400-mile trip from Banjoland to Palmville to get the rest of our stuff, and I cannot say as I approved of my brother's living conditions, but I guess that is beside the point. The month passed rather uneventfully. I guess sociopath figured he had won, so there was no need to burn the gas to drive out and gloat. The neighborhood had learned what was going on, and that was the first time I had ever been back in that neighborhood where I did not get a single call out, a single glare, a single racist remark. Everybody behaved reverently. It was kind of disturbing in all honesty. I guess people in lower incomes all know what eviction means and felt like I was having a bad enough time already. Well, 20 days later he says it is time to leave. We still had a week left, but it did not matter. We did not have the money to try fighting it with a lawyer. AM descended from the heavens and bought us a couple extra days, but it was evident he really wanted us out, possibly because the work trucks were now one street anyway. The last time I ever saw the house I grew up in, workmen were throwing my childhood possessions into a large bin when we supposedly still had 3 days left to leave. Everything that follows is a collection of information I got through the grapevine and phone calls with people present at the events. Immediately, sociopath moved into the house himself. Why, you may ask? People who owned the homes they were living in were getting the full cost of renovations comped by the city. He figured that by moving in himself he would be able to get this house he bought at liquidation price renovated for free and flip it. AM was having none of it. She explained to him that at the time the revival project was approved, that house was a rental lot and they cannot change the budget now. She then explained to him that the partial cost coverage that had been approved for the lot was in our name, not his, and he was not eligible for partial cost comping either. He'd have to pay every penny himself, and since the entire neighborhood was getting a facelift, he was required to at least renovate the exterior, otherwise she would see the house condemned as an eyesore or dilapidated or whatever the legal term is. He went really cheap on the renovations, basically put in new carpets and a coat of paint. This would later come to bite him in the ass. He then began trying to sell the house in earnest. The neighborhood remembered what he had done. There were vandalisms when nobody was there and loud noises from the neighbors when people were there to look the house over. And anytime a prospective buyer asked around, they got the full stink eye from anybody they talked to. They made sure he simply couldn't get that house sold at market value. After 3 months of this, he lowered the listing price, and then a month later he lowered it again and finally got a bite. AM personally made sure he had to file every single piece of paperwork before it changed hands. Every single part of the house had to be inspected thoroughly. And that is when karma herself caught up with him. In his hasty and cheap renovations, he had somehow damaged the pipes. Black mold. AM remembered how he had treated us, and she decided to pay him back in kind. I never heard how exactly she pulled it off, but she managed to delay him getting the news about the black mold being discovered for several days, long enough that by time he did get the news, he did not have enough time left to try getting it cleaned or make a last-ditch effort to save the house. The house was condemned days later. In their final act, AM and members of the community filed every single complaint and injunction they could and arranged for him to be compelled by the city to demolish the house immediately, a cost he had to pay out of his own pocket. He tried to destroy a family and broke laws just to make some quick cash, and instead he was left fighting a year-long legal battle and ended up losing thousands. The neighborhood remembers, the neighborhood punishes. And by the way guys, once again, just in case I hadn't mentioned this before, I still always read your comments, and I've noticed that quite a few people actually requested that I read legal advice more frequently again. And yes, that is exactly what is going to happen. However, I gotta say, legal advice nowadays is not as easy to do as before. Because I've already read so many legal advice stories, it is not that easy to find new and interesting ones anymore. However, I will try my best for you guys, and you will see some new legal advice soon. And the next one is titled, She Took My Cat. This is both a rant and a request for help. My cat is not an indoor cat, she is an outside one. I tried to get her to stay inside, but she's a big one that loves climbing the huge trees and chasing feral cats. She did occasionally go inside, but after a time she would always wait by the door to go outside. And she always came back. She responds to her name, she responds to commands and behaves in such a way we something call her the guard cat. It has been a week since I saw her. I was worried, I did not know what to do until I was outside with some neighbors. They knew her very well and they said it is strange that they have not seen her around. And then an old lady walked by. Old lady,
that black cat you mean?
Me? She's not black, she's spotted, and she's not that cat, she's cat. Replace name because it is foreign and hard to spell. Old lady,
no, she's little Puff, she's mine, I took her in. It's the best for her. Outside is not a place for a cat. I cannot believe you taught her such bad manners. She only stays by the door. Who knows how you beat her that she's so afraid to stay inside.
Me? How dare you? How dare you? I was really angry at this point. I really care about Cat and I cannot believe someone is forcing her inside. Another neighbor, what rotten soul do you have inside that you steal other people's pets? Old lady,
what a fuss you make about such a good thing. I adopted her and you're lucky I did not call animal control on you for animal abuse.
Me, let Cat out. She's not an inside cat. You are stressing her. You don't even know her. She will bite your hand when you pet her wrong. OL,
that is the bad manners you gave to little Puff. I will teach her discipline and you cannot prove it's yours, can you?
AN2, that is heartless. Give her the cat back. You should be more wise at your age. OL,
I'm surrounded by idiots.
And she ran inside, and she's right. It is not like I have a certificate for cat or anything. You usually don't have papers for pets here unless they are some breed and you want to prove that. How do I get Cat back? Update. First things first, I want to thank you all that gave advice and shared your stories and so on. You have been a great help. Yesterday, I gathered all evidence I could that Cat is mine, but most of my photos with her were with her alone, and I was a bit worried until we struck the gold mine. My sister had a video, old one of us, hanging around with Cat inside, with Cat getting scratches from both of us. I went that evening to the OL, but she did not answer the door. It was dark outside, so I figured she was asleep. I talked to her neighbor instead, who said she will be looking for Cat. I did not sleep much, but I met with my neighbors today and a lot of other people because there's nothing faster than word of mouth in a village. We discussed what we should do, showed them the proof I had, and we decided police was not going to help. There were multiple stories from them about police don't even caring or worse, giving them fines for wasting police time. That is how it is for villages. So instead we decided to go together to the OL with the proof I gathered. There were so many people. At first old lady did not answer the door, but we kept insisting and some people started yelling, "Give Cat back!" She answered the door finally and a shouting match started. I don't quite remember much of it, but I remember very well when one guy shouted above everyone else, "We are not leaving until you give Cat back!" A couple of shouting between both parts and then it was over. OL went inside to release Cat as she was outnumbered by a lot and could not fight the whole village. If you are wondering how she kept Cat inside, she had Cat tied to a bed leg with a blue rope used for making hay bales. I wish I could say Cat ran faster than everything, but that is how she runs always. We left the old lady's place and headed for mine. Some people left and there were fewer by the time we reached my house, but in the walnut tree in her usual place there was Cat, and after I thanked them and they said stuff like "you are welcome," they left me to attend to Cat. Her fur looked a bit rough. She came down from the tree when I called her. She did not want to go inside, so I brought her food outside. I stayed with her until she finished eating, got her some water too, but she was not interested. I got close to her and scratched behind her ears, her favorite, and she had nothing against it. I looked her over. She did not seem to have any injury or part that hurts. You could see against her fur where she was tied, but it did not go into her skin, so that is good. After we hanged around a bit more, she climbed back in the tree to stay in her favorite place. I will stay outside a little bit more now. I talked to the village vet and he does not have what he needs to get her microchipped. I thought so, therefore I will be taking Cat to the city in the next days. I am so thankful she is back and for your and village people's help. You could say that I see what I want to see, but the male goose looked a bit happy too, as he does not need to fend off ferrets alone anymore. The guard cat is back. And guys, how would you react if a crazy lady like that would steal your pet, or essentially actually kidnap your cat? Let us know in the comments. And the next one is titled, I Had a Psycho Neighbor. Ripe has my permission to use this story in a video if he wants to. I lived on the second floor of a 2-story building in a medium-sized apartment complex. No one lived below me for a couple of months until a couple moved in. The wife is insane. They were stalking and harassing me and no one would listen. They would blast the TV all day until they went to bed. I went down and asked nicely to please keep it down. Well, that worked for a whole day. Once I was just sitting and watching TV when there was a really loud banging. It shook everything. I was worried some of my stuff would get broken. It was so bad. The psycho girl was pounding on the ceiling as hard as possible. I was literally sitting in my big chair doing nothing but watching TV. I filed several noise complaints. The police went there several times and nothing was working. I started working on getting them evicted. Management was about to evict them until they put in a request for a 2-bedroom. They were moved, but only to the next building over. After they moved over one frickin' building, I was leaving the gas station convenience store. When I got in my car, I look over and I see her, that psycho girl from hell. I get home and was watching TV in my bedroom since I moved it there because of them, and I heard her screaming something I could not make out as she drove past. Her husband saw me about to go in my place and yelled something at me I could not make out on another occasion. One time she started charging at me as I was getting into the car to go to work. I ended up breaking my lease and moving. I never had a negative experience living in an apartment until I moved there. It was awful, and I am so glad I now own a house and will never live in an apartment again. And guys, I'm curious, did you ever have any horrible neighbors when you lived in an apartment? Obviously, when you live in something like an apartment complex, awful neighbors can be even more annoying than when you own a house yourself. And guys, unfortunately, we have already reached the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed today's stories, and if you haven't already, please also go to patreon.com/ripeyoutube, where I upload exclusive Reddit videos starting at just $3 a month. This is a great way to support me in case you are interested, and the chance for me to become independent from YouTube revenue. Thank you so much for watching, please don't forget to subscribe and like the video, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.